Welcome, everybody, to True Believers here on the Fandom Podcast Network. Yeah, it's been a while since we've done a visit into the MCU and AMCU adjacent. It's been a weird time for Marvel. It's definitely not the best of times, but I don't know if it's necessarily the worst of times either, especially with what has happened recently with the advent of X-Men 97. And that is what we are here to talk about today as True Believers returns to the Fandom Podcast Network. Of course, your home for all things fandom and pop culture. Make sure you check us out if you're watching on our YouTube channel at at Fandom Podcast Network on YouTube. Great. Please make sure you give us a like, a subscribe, and share us out. And if you're listening to the audio, whether it's on Podbean or one of the great audio catchers out there, we really appreciate it. But yes, we are going to be talking X-Men 97 today. I am excited to talk about this. This is a show a lot of people have been excited for a while when they announced it. But you know what? I cannot talk about the X-Men alone. No, I need to put out my telepathic call to me, my podcast X-Men. And I've got a couple great ones here who happen to know something about a major franchise on Disney because they are from the Drunken Gungan, which means I've got the crew of What a Piece of Junk here. Of course, I have Captain Scott Botman joining us. Scott, how are you, sir?
Oh, I have to answer out loud. Sorry, the telepathy won't get it done. Yes, indeed, Kyle. It's so great to be talking Marvel Comics. We are recording this episode on Friday, May the 31st, 2024. And it's a Friday night, and I'm sitting here talking about X-Men from back in the 20th century. What is there not to love? But you're absolutely correct that for Marvel these days, it is a tale of two comics, I guess, not a tale of two cities, as you alluded to in your opening. It's hit or miss, and we can talk a little bit more about what counts as a miss. But this show, X-Men '97, absolutely counts as a hit for me. I loved it.
Absolutely, Scott. And we got one more member here. When he's not chasing mutant redheads, don't tell his wife. But he, of course, is the one and only. Maybe we'll call him Gambit, but I don't think he can do a very good French or Cajun accent. But the one and only Derek Marsh.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not going to pull one of those. So.
Come on, Sheree.
But you were absolutely right. Yeah, that
Uh,
I'll be chasing some mutant tail later if I can. Some of them may actually have a tail too. It just depends.
Yeah, these things happen.
But no, great to be on this. Yeah, it's as you both of you have talked about just briefly there. It's been weird, right, for both Star Wars and for Marvel or the MCU, under the Disney banner. It doesn't feel like that just long ago. We've talked about it, right, with the Infinity Saga and wrapping up. Crazy as it is, it's been almost 5 years come July here in a couple of months. Cultivating, what was a 10 plus year run of just couldn't really do anything wrong. Not to say every movie was perfect or everybody's cup of tea, but pretty much it was just, one grand slam after another. And then Star Wars kind of under the Disney banner tripped itself a little bit out the gate, had some really good stuff. And then, we feel, at least when we talk about it on What a Piece of Junk, they've had a lot more hits and home runs and even a couple of grand slams more than they have strikeouts, at least in, maybe some, popular opinion, audience opinion, whatever you want to call it, fan opinion. But yeah, I'm here to talk about X-Men 97. Yeah, to me, this is a grand slam, guys. And I can't wait to talk about it with you.
Absolutely. This is a hit close to home for me podcast. I grew up reading X-Men comics. X-Men and Spider-Man were my gateway drugs into comic books, without a doubt. In fact, I think the first ever comic book I read was a Spider-Man comic, and probably one of the first things I read as a kid. And then X-Men just pulled me in hook, line, and sinker, going back to the classic John Byrne, Chris Claremont days, all the way through to the height of Jim Lee, which is a lot of the inspiration for X-Men 97, to even what we have now as House of X is wrapping up, and we're getting go into a new era of X-Men here very shortly. But guys, X-Men 97, when it was announced by Disney, this was a thing that grabbed a lot of people's attention because for a lot of people of a certain age, X-Men was one of the key cartoons in them growing up, whether it was on Saturday mornings or weekdays in syndication. So I want to just ask you guys real quick, what is your relationship growing up with not only the X-Men comics, but the original
Yeah, so for me, I started reading comics with Marvel's adaptation of G.I. Joe, and then, of course, also with Marvel's adaptation of the Transformers, the very first limited 4-issue series, you know. And then when I found non merchandise toy tie in comics, it was actually starting with X Factor. I don't know if you guys remember X Factor.
Oh yeah, the
Kyle
original
nodding his
5.
head. Yeah.
Yeah, the original
Yeah, it was
5
kind of
coming
like
back.
Right. It was kind of like when Cyclops and friends retired, or they all became adults and had adult stuff to do. They formed X Factor as their way to continue helping as superheroes, but also having a life outside the school and Professor Xavier. And that led into X Force because I thought, oh, how cool, X Force is starting. I'm going to be able to jump in at issue number 1 and really get going. And of course, that led me. So Cyclops was my favorite X-Men character for the longest time. Not the least of which reason why, as a teenage boy, hey, he has my name. It was rare for a superhero or any character to be named Scott back in those days. And so I'm like, this is really cool. And then when I got X-Force, I became a huge fan of Shatterstar. And so, it was the 90s. Everybody had to be extreme and have a bunch of pouches everywhere on their costumes and so forth.
I thought that was a prerequisite. Bravo, I feel the rules. So
absolutely, yes.
that
so
you
when,
had to wear. Wait, let's not forget you did have to wear Levi jeans to read.
Yes,
the first issue of X Force.
That's right. And then, so when Cable showed up on the cartoon, so that led me to watching the weekday after. For me, it was syndicated weekday X-Men cartoons after school. And so that led to when Cable showed up on the cartoon, I was losing my mind because he had all the pouches and everything. And so then, of course, when he showed up again in X-Men 97, I was like, woohoo, this is so great. I was very skeptical when this X-Men 97 series was announced by Disney and Marvel. I was like, oh, this is going to be some nostalgia play. I was almost worse than skeptical. I may have been circumspect as to whether or not they were really going to put any effort into the storylines. I thought it would just be kind of, them trying to get a quick hit of the 90s nostalgia, keying off of all the stuff that had just happened with, the Spider-Man movie involving Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield and all of that stuff. But no. Oh man, the people who made X-Men 97, they clearly have been reading X-Men comics probably, maybe even longer than me, because I'm talking like 1989 for X Factor. They really poured their love and passion for the source material into this and took it to the next level. It wasn't just a follow-up to the X-Men animated series that was really good in its own right. But this show, X-Men 97, just went so far beyond it as far as the quality and the almost gravitas that was inherent in just about every episode. And we'll talk about their individual episodes later on in the podcast, but you could definitely tell that there was a moment of rising conflict, rising tension, and then we just had like hit it. Like Derek said, it was a grand slam. I knew most of these stories backwards and forwards, and several episodes I still just was sitting there with my mouth agape and sometimes tears streaming down my cheeks after the episode was over. And I'm just like, this was so well done. I hope these people win a bunch of Emmys, and I want to see, 2 or 3 more seasons at least.
Well, we know we're getting 3, but Derek, what about you? What was your introduction to the X-Men, both in comic book format, and when did you get in with the cartoon?
So X-Men itself wasn't my first comic that I ever got. My first one I can remember, I was 6 years old. It was 1989. And obviously in first grade, right, you're starting to learn to read, right? And we've all talked about what's one of the best ways to get kids to read is comic books. So Avengers 300 came out in 89. And that was really my first comic. It was really cool. My first true superhero I really fell in love with was Iron Man. But I loved Captain America, Hawkeye, all that stuff. Obviously now I'm more Team Cap than Team Iron Man because I understand Civil War better as an adult. But
subtle.
Okay. I have to pause you for just a second because I'm looking at it now and I remember this book very well. Talk about a first like Marvel book to get into, because here you have the Avengers, but Captain America is not Captain America, and you have 2 members of the Fantastic Four as members of the Avengers.
Yeah. So it was all over the
This
place.
is kind of like how my kids had never been to Gen Con, and their first Gen Con was Gen Con number 50, the Golden Anniversary Convention. And I'm just like, boys, it's never going to be better. I'm really sorry.
Well,
Every
maybe
Gen
another
Con
50
after this,
years when they get to Gen
yeah,
Con
you're going to
100.
be like, yeah, exactly. You're going to be like, well, this is cool, but it wasn't as good as Gen Con 50. So Derek's all, this is great, but it's no Avengers number 300. You're like, yes, Derek, we know.
So, but it was just amazing. So it's like, you know, and I knew a little bit of comics, you know, specifically around like the Hulk, because that was something that, you know, Lou Ferrigno and all them back in the day, right? You had the Spider-Man. I knew Superman, obviously. You knew Batman, right? From those things too, because then obviously you had Batman 89, right? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that came out around comic book characters back then, right? So, but that was really my first true comic that I got into. And then right around, it would have been maybe 1990 or 1991, I started getting into the Flair comic book cards, like the actual, you know, X-Men and mutants and the Avengers and all the comic book cards that they used to have. Really like that. And obviously you get the cool thing about everything on the back of the cards. There was two different types of cards that either gave you snippets of iconic moments, right? That actually, you know, kind of laid out what the comic was, or the picture of the card was doing, right? Which was some of the iconic scenes that they had done up to that point, or some really great battles. Or it was really cool. What I really enjoyed was you actually had the character cards, and on the back they had these little power grids, right? And it was telling you like, oh, here's like their mutant powers and all that stuff. So, and then in '92, obviously we get X-Men, you know, the first run of the animated series. Obviously watched it as much as I could. There was times where I probably missed something because I was either doing something on a Saturday and I couldn't quite watch it, but I pretty much tried to catch up as much as I could. Obviously there was no internet back then for us, you know, peons. So it was really hard. But that was one of the things that, you know, obviously I did a couple years ago when finally Disney had put everything on there. You could watch all the original X-Men. So I was actually able to watch it sequentially. And there were some things in there that I was like, oh, either I had forgotten about it or I never actually got to see it. But really what, you know, fascinated me was then in 95, which any of the What a Piece of Junk Space Junkies know, for the listeners out there, especially Scott, myself, and Nathan, we all love games, specifically, you know, card games, board games, all those types of things. Well, in 95, there was a really cool game as Magic was starting to take off that they did for comic book, which was Overpower. Right. So, and I pulled out a couple of the X-Men girls that, here we go. Of course, yes, my favorite redhead, Rogue. And then we also have the cool Psylocke, which we haven't got to see a whole lot of her yet. We did get a small cameo towards the end of it was either episode 9 or episode 10.
Yeah, a little morph to provide many cameos throughout X-Men.
Yeah, morph too.
Oh,
but
man.
then there was a scene somewhere, I can't think what it was, if it was when Magneto like completely like, you know, waged war essentially, as they said, and just shut off all of the polar magnets around the world. But definitely with the way, you know, I don't want to go too much into it because I'm sure we'll talk about it, but the way they ended season 10, with obviously, you know, reintroducing Apocalypse, you definitely know Psylocke most likely is going to be making some type of run in season 2.
So guys, the next picture I'm going to bring up, I'm just going to be flat out. You know, you're hearing that theme in your head right now, right?
Oh yeah. As my youngest son Joseph said, that theme slaps, and I'm like, that means it's good, right? He's like, yes, Dad, that means it's good. I'm like, all right, cool.
But one thing to call out though on this, I never skipped this intro on any of these 10 episodes like I might do with other series, simply because it was unique every single time.
Yeah, you had the different characters floating in and out of the episodes, and they would give them their own little banner space, which was cool, and I like that. So here's the crazy thing for me. So I want to go back to the original X-Men animated, because for me, X-Men animated actually goes back to the days of Spider-Man and his Amazing Friends, where they established Iceman and Firestar being from the X-Men, and that you had a couple of episodes where the X-Men guest starred, one where they fought the Juggernaut and one where they had like this whole thing with the Danger Room going crazy and everything like that. But then you go to about 1989, and there was a X-Men pilot animated that was actually made but never put out on television, but released on home video, called Pride of the X-Men. Now, this is very famous for several not so great reasons, including Australian Wolverine. So Hugh Jackman was just using his original regular voice for Wolverine. But,
That's right.
You can find this on YouTube, and I will tell anybody, if you've never seen it, go watch it. It's a great little piece of history. It's the introduction. It's basically the pilot. It was the initial pitch pilot for an X-Men animated series, and the jumping on point was Kitty Pryde joining the X-Men. So it's very good. But I remember the announcement of X-Men coming to Fox Kids, and I was so excited. You're talking the height of X-Men at this point. You've got X-Men #1 has just come out. Jim Lee and Chris Claremont are owning comics right now. It's phenomenal. And here's the crazy thing, and for those of you who maybe jumped on it when it first came out, X-Men '97, Night of the Sentinels, the original 2-parter, aired on Fox Kids over Thanksgiving weekend. They showed it initially, and then it was almost a full year before we actually got new episodes of the X-Men, and of course then they re-aired then Night of the Sentinels. And for me, by the time X-Men really hit its stride, it was something that I kind of watched here and there when I could catch it. Obviously, I was in high school. I worked in high school and just schedule. I didn't get to watch it all the time, but I always did like what I saw, and I thought it was a fairly good translation for knowing that you're also writing this for kids, not so much adults at that time. Which leads into, of course, the announcement of X-Men '97. And I'll be honest with you, I was a little skeptical about this. My memories of the original cartoon it was good, but it was a little corny too, and I don't know if I was a huge fan of the animation at the time. X-Men '97 hit, and I'll be honest with you guys, the first few episodes, it took me a little bit to get into it. The animation style was unique. It was good, but it also had moments where it was kind of a little off-putting, and I think it was a little bit because of the Siege computer animation style they mixed in with it. And the first 4 episodes were fun. I loved how they brought in so much in the first 4 episodes. Episode 5, this show just took the turn, and they went to a storyline that I knew was coming. They were setting it up. I just didn't think they would take that as far as they did with the attack on Genosha and the massacre that basically took place on Genosha. And from there on, this show just took off in an entire different direction. And I'll be honest with you, I had friends ask me if this would be good for their kids, and I literally asked them, I said, how old are your kids? Because after episode 5 on, I can't recommend this for somebody who has a young child. It's very heavy, very emotional, and pretty dark. But I've got to give it to them. They took something, Scott, like you said, that could have just been as easily a nostalgia grab and made something really special out of it. So what I want to ask before we get into some of the finer points is just, we're doing this after the whole season has aired. It was only 10 episodes. We know we're getting season 2 and season 3, but really kind of a little bit deeper dive into it. What were you surprised? What were your overall thoughts on what they did with this X-Men '97? Did you go in with high excitement? Were you skeptical? Was it something that it started? How did it start? Were you in from minute 1, or did it take you a few episodes, Scott?
Yeah, so the first episode, I did not actually watch episode 1 and episode 2 as soon as they were available. I sort of put it on my list of to be watched, And then my son Joseph was like, Dad, have you seen this thing? And I'm like, well, I mean, I watched the original cartoon back before you were born, He's like, yeah, well, you'll love it. You gotta check this out. So I watched the first couple episodes, and then I texted him, and I was all like, oh my gosh, you were right. This is awesome. And I love that they kept the original theme music. But I didn't feel like it was appointment viewing. And so I got around to episode 3. I had not yet watched episode 4 when episode 5 came out, and my social media feed blew up.
Yeah.
I mean, Cal, you were saying that episode 5 took it to the next level. Oh my gosh. Everybody was like, don't watch X-Men '97 today unless you have a box of tissues. And I'm just like, it must be legacy virus or something is happening because all these noobs don't know what's going to go down. Or maybe Wanda Maximoff has shown up and she's going to be all, no more mutants or something, right? And then I saw the the title, and I was like, oh, that's what we're gonna do. Okay, yeah, this will be pretty heavy. So I watched episode 4, pretty good. I watched episode 5. I'm like, I know exactly what happens here. And then the Master Sentinel showed up. The Mega Sentinel showed up and just laid waste. And Gambit did his thing, and I was like, oh my god, this is incredible. And at the end of the episode, everything has occurred, and I'm just sitting there, tears coming down my face. I was like, I can't believe they did this well enough for me to cry when I already knew how this was going to end. Although it is ending slightly differently than it did in many of the comic interpretations, because I kept expecting that Cable would be able to do his thing and time travel, and everybody will be fine, Gambit will be back to life, etc., etc. But they're not doing that on this show. This is a slightly different retelling of the story, and so Nightcrawler has been quote unquote officially confirmed as the replacement for Gambit on the team. I guess, I don't know, spoiler alert, are we doing that?
Well, yeah, I mean, at this point, everybody's had a chance to see it. I still think we'll see Gambit come back because there's a storyline there for bringing
Sure,
back.
but I don't think he'll come back the same way that he did in the comics, which is cool. I like that it's its own interpretation. In fact, I think, and we could talk about this when we're going to do a little season 2 speculation, I think Gambit's going to be one of the Horsemen of the Apocalypse this time.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. I think that's I think that's where they're going.
Anyway, but yes, that's exactly how. So episode 5, from then on out, it was appointment viewing, and Mita, my real life lovely comic book redhead wife, watched it with me. And the fun part about that was, so many of these storylines Mita did not know. I mean, she knew a lot of X-Men lore from the turn of the century Patrick Stewart, Professor X Marvel films, and a little bit from a couple of comics here and there. These days in pop culture, if you're a fan at all, you sort of pick up on some stuff, right? But the big thing that Mita didn't know, one, she didn't know about Madeline being a clone of Jean Grey, so that was a nice shock and surprise to her. She was like, oh, this is interesting, especially since, she's also a redhead, and she's got the whole thing about, people think of us as weird and magical, and Madeline is the perfect example of that idea. I was kind of hoping they might give her a different villain name besides the Goblin Queen, because that's a little weird. It was
still weird
back then.
After all these years.
It's still weird now. Anyway, but be that as it may, that was interesting. And then during the part where Cable first showed up and said, I'm sorry, Mom, she was just like, what? She had no idea that Cable was Nathan. From the future. She was like, she audibly gasped on the couch. And I was like, you didn't know that? Oh, this is so cool. It's like watching somebody find out that Darth Vader is Luke's father, almost literally, because this is about parentage. And so every time they did a segment of the show in season 1 where Nathan was dealing with, I can see my parents as young people, even though I didn't grow up with them, she was very interested in that part of the show. And that was really, really well done also. And I love Mr. Sinister's part in all of this and how they essentially diffused him here at the end of the season. Seeing the way that he interacted with Cable, and then crossing your fingers and hoping that Bishop is going to pull off some sort of time travel assistance to Cable, because he was supposed to take care of Nathan as a child, and as we know, that didn't exactly go according to plan. But I think we'll see more about that in season 2 as well. But yeah, overall, it was just an excellent experience. Way more intense than I was expecting. And of course, like you said, Kyle, it was really just, there's before Genosha and after Genosha on this show. And I think that when we all found out that, and I can't remember the name of the guy, the major creative force behind the show that somehow has split from the show, I can't think of his name right now, but we found out during some
that would be Bo DeMeo.
Thank you. When we found out DeMeo had been inspired, or I don't even know if inspired is not the right word, but one of his chief motivators for doing the Genosha massacre the way that it happened was his own experience with the attack at the Pulse nightclub in Florida several years ago, when there was a shooting there at this gay club, and how that was how he and his friends sort of were reacting in the same way and suffering a similar way as the mutants being attacked in where they thought was a safe place for people like them, right? X-Men's always at its best when it embraces the idea of the mutants are outcasts in society, and this is a dark mirror for us to hold up to society, to us, in how we treat people who are different and weird and outsiders, right? And so knowing that he was able to take that personal pain and infuse it into the Genosha storyline really helped me understand why it came across as just so much more important than even it did back in the original comics. And it seems as though he has put that kind of personal passion into all of the show. And I'm desperate to know why he got fired. I know there's been a documentary.
There's a lot of questions still to be answered about that.
Yeah, there's a documentary about that, and I don't know.
Yeah, I've heard some stories about he maybe not was the easiest person to deal with, but it's all here or there. But Derek, one of the things too for me, and I'm curious your thoughts on this too, is how many huge X-Men storylines they fit into a 10-episode season with this, because they covered almost 200 issues of different storyline parts in this run.
Yeah, that was actually going to be probably my only gripe with this show, was that it was just a little too quick. I get, at this point, since X-Men, the animated show went off the air, or ended almost 30 years ago, to your point, how do you fit potentially 30 years of comics into, because you could really do even just a year of comics would still be more than enough to do a 10-episode season, right? If you think about it. Anime and manga has been doing it for generations now at this point, right? So there's a lot of times where the animated shows were actually almost had caught up after years and years of the mangas being well written ahead of it, and they caught up to it, and then they had to actually wait till the actual next manga debuted before they could actually air the next episode, right? Or then actually draw it and air it. So that would be my only complaint. Because it definitely felt, if you knew the comics, you knew a lot was going on. And that's the only thing that is, I don't want to say bad or disheartening, discouraging or anything. It's just, there's a lot of good dialogue and material, not to say that they put everything in there, but if you did read the comics, or at least were well versed enough to know in some of the key details of each of those comics, again, they couldn't cover everything. Especially with the whole Madeline Pryor and the Goblin Queen, and really why she got called the Goblin Queen to begin with, right, was because of the house of the horrors at the mansion and everything. Yeah, there's just a lot of stuff that they missed there. Just trying to really cram it into really not even a full 30 minutes, right? It was, I don't know, 26 or something like that, 24 minutes or whatever. So, but this show, no, to me, I was on board as soon as I saw the trailer whenever it came out 4 or 5 months ago. Maybe it wasn't quite that long ago. It's hard to say. Maybe at this point it's been 4 or 5 months ago, but maybe 3 months or 2.5 months before it actually episode 1 premiered. So I was on board as soon as I saw that, because I was like, oh, okay, they are trying to do as much as they can to stick with the original. And so I was super excited watching episode 1 and 2. Oh, I was like, okay, I'm hooked. I'm good. The way, once I knew that they were committed to doing, at least at that point, what the comics were doing, or did, I should say, then I was like, okay, they're sticking to exactly the same thing that the original series did, because that's what drew me to the X-Men comics. Was I watched it basically first, and then I would go out and then read the comic, right, or figure out a way to get a hold of it. Which for a lot of folks, typically, that works both ways, right? Definitely in movies today, right? A lot of times there's adaptations of some of our favorite novels, trilogies, or whatever gets put into a movie. And we want to complain, they didn't do this or that. They, they totally rewrote that character in the way that was, the author originally intended to them. But then there's a lot of times when there's folks like myself in this particular instance where you see it, and you're like, oh, this is really good. Let me go read it. And then you're just like, oh, okay, this is really good, right? And again, I'm not taking anything away from the animated show, because I get it. But, to be able to go out and really, get some of those key issues, to digest it, kind of the long haul, it really builds it up. And it really hits home. And, when they gave Magneto the X-Men, and he's leading them, and he's trying to do everything he can, and then they still, attack him, and then, but he still overcomes that. It's just, it's hitting on every fiber of people in today's society and the way things are. And you could definitely understand from Magneto's point how he's feeling, right? And that's how people are today, right? As Scott alluded to earlier. there's nothing about X-Men that you can't literally put into real life, even back in the 90s when we were reading those comics to today's stuff. Especially with still the issues we're having with violence and racism, war, bigotry, sexism, all that stuff that's going on in the real world right now. And X-Men's able to tell that, just like I've really appreciated when Star Trek does the same thing, right? You don't have to, you know, shove it down my throat and tell me, the things that we're doing wrong. Be creative, make me think about it, make me understand, oh, I can see where this relates to this and this. And then to, Scott's point about about Bo, I'm sorry, and his relationship and why he said that Massacre of Genosha hit home to him and why he needed to make like that. Because then it's like, yeah, I can definitely understand that when somebody goes through those types of traumatic experiences, to be able to then visually display it, tell that story in a creative way and get me to feel hopefully the same emotions you felt. That is great storytelling. That is great filming. And that's everything that they did in this first season. Again, whether that was just riding the highs of some of these really, really great episodes, but again, I think almost every episode was really good. Even though to your point there, Kyle, that some of it did feel rushed. But overall, it was, just hit everything. There's still some things that I think that they could have told, like I said, that they missed. And I was like, oh, they didn't talk about that or they didn't do that. Is that going to be something that they'll, tell later in season 2 or 3? Because like you said, Scott, right, they're doing things a little bit different. So it's not to say that those things won't still happen, can't still happen, right? Because especially when Cable and Bishop and even Forge are involved, and we can time travel anytime and tell a side story of something else or reset the timeline like they do all the time, and then retell that story, but with the actual things that we missed and are hitting that now. So but yeah, no, this was wonderful. And yeah, even though there's could have made this 30 episodes for this season, would have loved it, but I'm okay with what we got.
Scott.
Yeah, it would have been awesome if we had an old school syndicated season of at least 22 episodes. But your point about not every storyline could get the attention and time it needs, Derek, is well made. I think you hit on it with the Goblin Queen. I would have loved to have seen more of Madeline in her Goblin Queen costume, but that's neither here nor there. But also, the one storyline that I felt didn't get hardly any attention, and it was a big deal in the comics, was Professor X getting married on an alien planet, and then in the Shi'ar Empire. I mean, we do have Gladiator show up and stuff is happening, but at a certain point, you have to realize that those characters in that situation were its whole huge landmark moments of, oh my gosh, Professor X is not really dead. Wait, he's on an alien planet. He's in love with this woman who is not human. I mean, it is just really like hard sci-fi, almost Marvel space type of comic crossover. And I think that we might get some more flashbacks to that in season 2. And I hope that we do, because like you said, Derek, there's a lot of landmark moments that they kind of had to skip over or gloss over because they were trying to get caught up to a certain point in the storyline to really emphasize, I think, to really emphasize Apocalypse, because Magneto is kind of like not really a villain in this show. Famously, Stan Lee and those guys, that when they first created X-Men, they had in mind certain parallels to the racial integration and segregation happening in the United States in the 1960s. Professor X has always been supposed to be the Martin Luther King of mutant kind. And Magneto, of course, then is Malcolm X. And so, depending on who you ask, Malcolm's not a villain. He's just doing things differently. And that's exactly the kind of characterization of, Joseph is going to be his name for a bit here, that we have. And I can't wait to see almost that version of Magneto where he kind of sort of doesn't exactly have amnesia, but he sort of has a reset. And we saw that right there at the end of season 1, where Professor X was in his mind and they were in the waters were washing over them metaphorically, but also literally. I mean, we even had Asteroid M happening in this show for like 15 minutes. It's like Magneto is all, by the way, I'm going to use my powers to create this asteroid base, and then we're going to blow it up. And I'm just like, Asteroid M! Oh, and there it goes.
Well, and some of these stories were told in the original series. If you go back
Yeah.
and rewatch everything, it was kind of like, okay, I knew this already existed, at least from the original season. So is it just refreshing our minds, or is this kind of resetting everything? Because the last season was just a hodgepodge of a mess, let's be honest. We
Yeah.
watched it, had some good storyline arcs, but it was just all over the place. But yeah, there's definitely a lot here that they missed that they could still tell in some version of another, whether it's through flashbacks or again, they'll reset the timeline and kind of that was the key thing that Cable said, right? There's key points in the timeline that cannot be altered and changed, right? And no matter how many times, what you said was over 100, Genosha has to happen.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like David Tennant said when he was Doctor Who. I'm so
Fixed
sorry.
points.
I'm so sorry. It's a fixed point in time. I can't go back and change this. And then, of course, in the new Doctor Who, the Doctor tells Penny that, dang it, I can't think of her name now. Tells his new companion Penny that no, Ruby, that's her name. He tells Ruby that
Ruby
he
Sunday.
can't take her. He can't take Ruby Sunday back to that church where she was left as an orphan that night, for some reason. So
Cause a paradox. But
Yeah.
guys, too. I mean, when I kind of researched it, I mean, X-Men '97, they basically take stories starting with about X-Men 200, where that was the original storyline where Xavier is transported away by the Shi'ar to save his life, and Magneto kind of takes over the school and the New Mutants and things like that. And I mean, they ran through stories over 250 issues of X-Men, Uncanny X-Men, and X-Men comic books. So they crammed a lot in. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more time for like the Inferno storyline. I didn't think they would do it, but after watching what happened with Genosha, I would have liked to have seen the Mutant Massacre storyline. I think that would have been. I don't know if Disney would have been really willing to do that at the time, but I want to talk to you about the characters because we got our classic characters back, and we saw some new ones. Here I've got some of the early ones. We see Rogue, Cyclops, Jubilee, and Bishop. Here we got Wolverine, Beast, Gambit, and a few more. Sunspot. Talk about a random character to give us a spotlight to in this show. That was saying Morph, who I love this rendition of Morph, where they've kind of mixed him with what you originally had in the X-Men cartoon, but more of what the Morph that a lot of people fell in love with, either from the Age of Apocalypse or the book Exiles. And so you got a little bit of that. Obviously, you have Cable, Ford showing up. I love Nightcrawler in this series. I'm a Nightcrawler fan anyway, but I thought he was phenomenal in this series. So on the X-Men side, guys, who were your standout characters for this season? Because I'm just going to say real quick, I love Nightcrawler. I think this show did more for Cyclops street cred than any issue of X-Men has in a very long time. But Derek, who were some of your highlight characters on the X-Men side for this season?
No, I mean, you hit it. Obviously, key number one, Cyclops. Man, they actually made him like legit, like BADASS, right? Like they actually made him good. To the point it's like, oh, the dude can actually fight, right? It's not to the point where it's like, oh, Cyclops is, just shooting his eye beams, and maybe when he finally gets angry or somebody actually takes off his visor, does he actually go, like totally nuclear? But it's really cool there. It was good to see, Storm in still kind of infancy points with Omega, Omega form. Obviously, we get so many renditions of Magneto. I mean, for him, he is one of the most powerful mutants of all time, and there was just key points over and over again. I loved his get up there, the new version, right? He still pulled out the helmet in the final couple episodes, so that was great. And I have to give kudos to right. Nightcrawler was one of my favorites as well. I always played him or Colossus, which we didn't get any in this. We got I think there was a small little cameo at some point from Morph, as well as something in either episode 8, 9, or 10, where they were showing something from the Soviet Union, SSR, or whatever Russia point it is at that time. So obviously when you talk about X-Men the arcade game, right, So Nightcrawler is always great because you could just zip across the whole screen when you use his mutant power. Um, but I loved his character though because he had a lot of really great sayings, especially when X-Men were having some of their most difficult times. Obviously, he's a faith-based still mutant, even though he is so easily discriminated because he can't hide who he is. He's not like most mutants that have the ability to hide their mutation or deformity. He literally can't. But the fact is that, they went into how him and Rogue are family due to the linkage of Mystique, even though they're technically not blood. Then they also went into all the different types of, portions, and it was just really great, well written character. They kept the accent on par. Again, we got him in quite a few episodes in the original run, but to actually see him on the big screen at the intro, like you said, towards the back half, right after Gambit, hits his demise. But like I said, there was even after episode 1, episode 2 actually has Magneto in the spot where Professor X is supposed to be. Which is really cool on that intro scene, right? So it's like there's just so many cool things that they really did with the characters to really help. Even Jean, after post Madeline Pryor, which is post Phoenix, point, they actually gave her. There was somebody that was doing a rendition of comparing side by side moments, and you could actually see where they made Jean Grey more powerful to her point as well because of her, being untapped potential now.
One of the things that I really liked when you talk about Nightcrawler too, I love the fact that they actually gave us what it was like for somebody teleporting with him, and that effect that they used when he's teleporting with Wolverine when they're fighting the Omega Sentinels. That was so cool, and just to get to see him doing his swashbuckling thing was
with
outstanding. Yep. Scott, I'm gonna bring this up to you, and Derek, I want your thoughts on this too. But Scott, I want to know who stood out for you, but I got to bring up real quick to the morph issue. Because technically, the way they portrayed him in this, Morph should be the most powerful mutant ever. Because when he morphs into him, he's not just getting their look; he's obviously getting their powers and skill sets. I'm like, so this is a bit much, guys.
Yeah, you were talking about how this version of Morph is a bit different than the original animated series Morph. He's like Morph and Mimic blended together. Because remember, Mimic could actually get your powers, but he had to see you do it and touch you to absorb part of your DNA or something along those lines. But he's like Mimic, Morph, and a little bit of Rogue mixed all together. Because it's like anybody he can think of and shapeshift into, he gets their powers. And it's not just limited to mutants, because he turned into the Hulk at that one point in time. And all of a sudden I was like, is that the Hulk? Was this an animation error? Come on, Disney. And then I realized, because Morph got me so many times this season. Every time he would turn into somebody off screen and he'd come on as that character, I was like, oh my gosh, where did Quicksilver come from? Oh, right, it's Morph. Oh my gosh, Shylock is there. She's so hot. Oh crap, that's Morph. Oh my gosh, the Hulk. Wait, the Hulk? Oh, that's got to be Morph.
Yeah, they definitely use Morph as their kind of skeleton key for cameos in this. But Derek, real quick, just what were your thoughts on how they handled with Morph in this season?
Again, due to the comics, but also for the different versions of Overpower, when you get the original Morph cards that they came out with 95, because again, in the original series, if you remember, Morph, like you said, kind of had that human face with the hair. He gets lost, then he gets brought back towards the end of season. It's either end of season 2 or end of season 3 when Sinister's kind of the big baddie and Morph's still alive, right? And he's being mind controlled and all that stuff. But this one is when we actually get what I would say the card version from Overpower. But obviously that was said later in the comics from the Age of Apocalypse, which is, again, that's what I'm expecting at some point too, with season 2 here. But yeah, it was definitely no surprise to me. But yeah, it was a little interesting. And maybe it's just a time thing. Like maybe you can only have their powers for so long. But yeah, it definitely felt weird. Like, wait, what's going on here? But yeah, it's cool.
Where did the Hulk come from? All right.
So besides Morph, Scott, who are your standout characters for this season? As far as the X-Men side of things go.
Yeah, I wanted to take a minute to talk a little bit about what Derek had to say about Kurt Nightcrawler being able to still be portrayed as having his really strong faith in God. I'm a big Christian as well, and I love that there's a Christian character. There was this excellent meme that I saw after that episode where Kurt was talking a lot about praying and whatnot, and it's one of these memes. It's the meme format of superheroes that are text messaging each other, right? Mm-hmm. So Daredevil is text messaging Nightcrawler, and he's like, "Hey, Kurt, thanks so much for coming to church with me this Sunday. I hope you weren't too put off by some of the people in our sanctuary being a little, let's just say, racist towards you. I know you tucked your tail into your coat, but they could still tell you were a mutant. I don't know how." And Kurt is like, "It is okay, Matt. I am often mistaken for something other than human because of my blue skin." And Daredevil goes, "Wait, you're blue?" And Kurt's like, "Oh, that's right, you're blind. I'm sorry. Yes, I have blue skin." And Daredevil's like, "Wow, I had no idea. Maybe I should start asking people when I meet them, 'Hey, what color are you?'" No. Don't do that. Don't do that. Which I thought was just a great exchange between the two of them. But yeah, Nightcrawler was really, really up there for me as far as characters go in the series. And Derek touched on it a little, but I also really liked the characterization of Storm in the show. And especially once we got to the point where she got shot by the Thing and she was depowered, and Storm had to basically go on this vision quest, if you will, to deal with what is life like now that I'm not a mutant. I think that's a really great take on, we view so often the mutations and their powers as a curse, but really if you embrace it like she had, it's an extension of yourself. And then to have that suddenly cut off, it's like losing a limb, right? And it's so much like losing a limb that the guy she has to go get help from is the dude who is famous for losing a limb and then overcoming it, right? So that kind of symbolism of, Storm needs help and Forge is the one to help her. It's just very well done. I mean, chef's kiss about Storm's return arc. Like, she felt as though part of her had been amputated, so here's this dude who's an amputee that's going to help her out. Yeah, that's the kind of thing that was just really well done. But then Forge is not presented as some sort of all-knowing, all-seeing, shaman. He's out there dealing with his own problems, and he gets infected by the Thing, and they have to deal with the the monster out in the desert. Like Derek was saying earlier, there's so many storylines that they sort of had to throw into the blender and microwave it instead of slow cooking it like it should have been. No smoker here, just a George Foreman grill.
I know when I was looking at the titles and I saw Life, Death Part 1 and Part 2 on the title list, I was like, oh, wow, they're going there. Because if you also go back, the crazy part about the Life, Death arc was it was actually a crossover when Marvel had the rights to ROM comics, and the Dire Wraiths were actually the quote-unquote demons that were causing all that. So that's again, just crazy history that this X-Men 97 series hit, even more so, I think, than the original. But guys, I want to talk about some of the villains that we saw in this episode because they hit that. We talk a little bit about Magneto. He's kind of anti-hero villain. Yeah. Episode 2, when he gives that speech, he is absolutely phenomenal. And then, just as he goes, the arc he has with Xavier at the end is one of the best portrayals of the Magneto-Xavier relationship I've seen on screen. I think even more so than any of the live-action films. Yeah. But we got a lot of other very interesting X-Men villains in this season, including, I got to go with one of the more off ones, but the fact that they had him show up and he played kind of a crucial part in this was the Executioner, basically a second-rate X-Men villain, but having him show up and he kind of took down Cyclops until Magneto really stepped in and went all out on him. He was giving the X-Men a run for their money, but we also saw, of course, as we talked about, Madeline Pryor becoming the Goblin Queen, then kind of taking a little bit of a different arc story than she ever did in the comics. But still, for trying to introduce this character in one episode and do this story arc the way they did it, considering it was like a story arc that ran for 3 or 4 years in the X-Men comics, just going from when she's introduced as Madeline Pryor and Mary Scott Summers in the comics to having Nathan Summers to when she becomes the Goblin Queen in Inferno, and then everything that happened after that. All things considered, a little frustrating you didn't get that full story, but they did a great job telling that story. Of course, Mojo, Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the Mojo verse. I like Long Shot and things like that, but the thing I loved about that episode was the references to the classic X-Men arcade game.
Yes.
Yes, totally.
All of
That
them.
was
It
yeah,
was
all
all
of them.
the SNES, the Genesis, all the stuff that they had.
Yeah, that was great. Of course, I thought it was a great portrayal of Mr. Sinister in
Oh, amazing. Very well done. Yeah.
this season. And Bastion, and talk about the amazing voice actors on this show. The gentleman who voiced act Bastion was just phenomenal because he played that creepy voice so well. Because it wasn't necessarily evil; it was just like that. Oh yeah,
I
he's
thought it
gonna
was
make this
Nathan
man crawl.
Fillion at first.
Yeah, yeah. It kind of came across that way. But guys, who are your standouts in the villains this year? I mean, we know next season a lot of focus is going to be on Apocalypse, but who was like your highlight? Hey, this is an X-Men villain I was so glad to see on screen.
I mean, I was excited to see Trask, but the human cyborg Sentinel Trask, right? Like as soon as Rogue was all, "I'm gonna let you have it, sugar," or whatever she said, and dropped him off the thing, I was like, "Oh, this is bad." Because X-Men, always you're supposed to understand that you shouldn't like really cut loose and beat the crap out of your enemies. That's not what the professor taught you. And every time you go against what Professor Xavier had taught you guys, it ends up turning out badly. And it sure did. I wasn't expecting it to turn out badly in that way quite as immediately, but him turning into the big, they thought he was dead, and he turns into the cybernetic sentinel human form and just like kicks the crap out of him for a while, and then leads to a whole bunch of bigger problems, right? Now, obviously, that was going to happen even if Rogue didn't kill him. But I think that if she had been able to control herself, I totally understand why she couldn't. I absolutely get it, because Gambit had just been killed by these things. That they would have been able to have Beast and or Jean Grey interact with Trask, either psychically reading his mind, telepathically, or, science. But whatever the case may be, and they would have been all, oh my gosh, if we give him enough power, he's going to turn into this like half human, half sentinel thing, and then they could sort of like diffuse it all before it turned into an army of killer human robots. But no, Rogue shows up and is all like, "That's it, you're toast, because your creation is what led to the destruction at Genosha." So all this stuff about Trask trying to do what he thought was right, and then suffering the ultimate fate of a horrible fate of not just dying, and failing, but turning into that like weird robot thing that's almost against his will. Just a great X-Men villain that originally started out as a really smart guy, almost like a paranoid version of Tony Stark. He doesn't build himself a suit of armor. He builds giant robots to help protect the world, in his opinion. And it's very much a parallel to Ultron, right? Is that Tony was trying to make all those robots to protect everybody, and it went bad. Same deal with the Sentinels, right? And so, yeah, Trask being such a major part of this season, excellent.
What about you, Derek?
I mean, every villain in this was good. It's hard to get super invested, though, at least in any of the major villains in this season, outside of Sinister, because we've had numerous encounters with Sinister already, and this felt like the typical kind of a 3-4 episode arc that we would have gotten in the original run, was evolved around him, which was good because it's always at some point it seems like Sinister's got his slimy fingers tangled in something around the X-Men, right? So, and even when he was quote unquote working for Bastion, he was still plotting his own side stuff, right? Like he's anticipating things going wrong because he's like, I've done this enough that the X-Men are going to be this, right? But he's definitely gone for the long run, because that was the whole point with Nathan Summers, right? And Cable, right? So it was kind of crazy, like, oh yeah, obviously, world genius type deal. Obviously, having the shortened season, it was hard for me to get too much involved into Bastion, because it was like, okay, he really didn't even make his first appearance until the end of episode, was it 5 or 6? I think it was 5.
It was 5 because you see him shaving Magneto, which was just creepy as all get
Well,
out.
was it? Well,
No, that's
wasn't
6.
at the end of
That
5.
was
It was
six.
that
You're
was
right,
6.
that is
at
6.
6. Yeah,
Yeah.
because five was ended with Rogue saying, "I can't feel your sugar."
Yeah.
And so so end of 6. So we really got him for really about 3.5, maybe 4 episodes in full. You get a little bit of an opportunity to kind of get into his past. They didn't go, which obviously we've gotten before, with Nimron. We've got him, in the original run as well. So it was kind of like, okay, I really wish they would have again given us 5 more episodes with this, where you could have really gotten a majority of this season to be about Bastion, especially since the way he quote unquote bit the dust at the end. It was like, oh come on, like okay, he gets absorbed by the reactor from Asteroid M, which I understand would kill him, but at the same time I'm like, but he's over electronics and everything technology. He should be able to do something with that to protect himself, right? Like whether it's he somehow shuts off the reactor, right? Because he could have whatever he did with his powers. um you know Obviously it's not the end. It never is the end with villains, right? And X-Men, somehow he'll always make a comeback. But anyways, yeah, and really, I was really hoping we were going to get. I mean, we'll talk about it with the age of, or with the ending with Apocalypse. But I was really thinking we were going to get the Onslaught series next. The way they did everything with Professor X and
man.
Magneto, and the way it was leading to that, which is always room for season 3. But
Yeah, and then of course, Spider-Man's been bopping around, and Silver
we
Samurai.
got Captain America and Iron Man.
Captain
cameo.
America's there. Iron Man's there. We could do Heroes Reborn. Oh, come on.
Yeah.
Anyway,
we're gonna get into that in a minute, but guys, I do want to go back to one other villain thing, because there's this, and we've talked about Genosha a few times, but again, I just come back to this. This was terrifying.
yeah,
How they portrayed the Master Mold and this Master Sentinel and how it went down. And I've got to be honest with you, I haven't been that on the edge of my seat watching something animated in a very long time. Just like it felt like the stakes were high, and I mean, and they were, but I mean, it was powerful. And this might be this right now, and I mean, there's a lot this year to go. Episode 5 might be one of the most powerful episodes of television, period, that I've seen this year.
it might be one of the best pieces of Marvel property at all this year too. I mean, part of that is because we're not getting a whole lot of Marvel stuff this year. Live action or animation wise. I'm not talking about comics. But yeah, this I was on the edge of my seat too. And when they first started fighting it, and I'm like, okay, I know a lot of mutants are going to get killed, but because this is sort of an extension of the kids show from Saturday morning back in 1990s, they're not going to kill any of the main characters. And then when Gambit got stabbed by the tentacle, I was like, oh my gosh, that is a lot of blood for this cartoon. And then, but I mean, it just was like our dial of violence and pathos goes to 11, and I was like, oh my gosh. And then he did the thing where he blew it up with his power. It was like one last move, and I was all, this was amazing. But yes, Kyle, that Master Mold version, or as Gambit called it, some kind of Godzilla Sentinel share, it's over there attacking the island. It's like, yeah, this is amazing.
Derek, what about you?
This is to give credit where credit's due. This is, to me, peak Rebels and Clone Wars storytelling when it comes to animation. Again, any of the listeners that are familiar with both, what we do here at True Believers, and then what we talk about at What a Piece of Junk, my praise for the storytelling of the animation, and I think that's also one thing that we have to consider. I feel like when you think about the IP of Star Wars, obviously The Mandalorian did a lot for revitalizing Star Wars, right? Especially since they got a lot of people that only watched the movies, hated the sequel trilogy, brought them back in with Grogu, Baby Yoda, and all that stuff. And, and it brought new fans in as well. This is doing the same thing to the MCU or to Marvel that's been lacking for the past 4 years, right? There's been some good stuff. Again, I am okay with what they've been doing with the MCU. Haven't liked everything, like we talked about, to open up the show, especially since phase 4 has been a lot more misses than we're used to. But this, I'm hoping will revitalize the audience and the fans, because there's a lot of people that just picked this up, never watching the original X-Men, the animated show. There's a lot of people that watched the original and were excited for this, right? And there was a lot of people that were disdained with what's been happening the past several years, but this has reeled them back in. So I'm hoping this, obviously, we're all excited for Deadpool and Wolverine. Hopefully that in this show will really help us get excited for what's coming next within the MCU. And there's a lot of people that are saying, like, why couldn't they just make this the X-Men of what we want for the MCU, right? Like, why couldn't they have just made this into like a live action show or whatever they needed to do, and do that? But this has been all it. That's my only fear, though, is that are they going to do this to basically get us caught up with current X-Men storytelling, and then that's what becomes live action? And it's like, no, that's not what I want. I want a perfectly done Dark Phoenix saga. I want that. I want, obviously, who knows what they're going to do with the Fantastic Four, but that would have been, I want the Galactus and the Doctor Doom, right? We want those things to happen. They've been very poorly done previously with both iterations from Fox, from the original Fantastic Four and the original X-Men movies. There was a lot of good things that the X-Men movies did, but there was some really bad stuff. But we really want them to hit it out of the park when it comes to the X-Men, because I do feel like that is probably a more beloved franchise prior to what Iron Man and all that they did with the Infinity Saga, that people were more excited about, just because it was probably more freshly done. Same thing with Spider-Man, right? Versus what they've been doing with ever since with the MCU. But yeah, this has been, fantastic storytelling. And I would agree, Kyle, that this episode, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that they shouldn't win multiple awards for this season of X-Men 97.
Yeah.
Derek, you were talking about. Sorry, Kyle. This is bursting out of my head. You were talking about Bastion only showing up in the last couple episodes, right? But turned out he was sort of behind it all the whole time. I felt like he was their version of Moff Gideon, right? To bring it back around to What a Piece of Junk. We got Moff Gideon, and he's an excellent villain, but he's really only been in just a few episodes. He's always sort of behind the scenes doing stuff, right? And he left me wanting more. And I think that the folks over at Disney these days, whether it be Lucasfilm, Marvel, or whomever, have really grasped that concept of not every villain has to be so sympathetic and have this awesome backstory all of a sudden. They can just be a force of evil, right? Like you were talking about, Derek, sometimes just give me a bad guy who is a bad guy. He has it's not because he couldn't earn his Eagle Scout merit badges in the order that he wanted to back in 1979. He's just a bad guy, right? And so the case may be that Moff Gideon is more like that than Bastion is, because we did see Bastion's backstory to a certain degree, but we definitely didn't get him in large doses in the same manner that they did with Moff Gideon. And I think their stories, when it's an adventure story, serial story, a interconnected series like this, it's much better when your villain is something that is easily digestible and understandable, like Moff Gideon and Bastion.
Yeah. Okay, so real quick, I want to talk about all the cameos that were in this, because we got a lot of cameos, especially towards the end. Obviously, we get an early Spider-Man cameo. Obviously, all the cameos with Psylocke. We get a great, interesting little Silver Samurai cameo. A great Captain America cameo with Rogue throwing the shield about 50,000 miles. And, of course, at the end of these episodes, you see Daredevil. You see Cloak and Dagger, of all people. You see Iron Man and Captain America.
Thunderbolt Ross.
Yeah, but they did something really, really sneaky in the final episode of this series, too, because not only did this show tell the tale of the X-Men and continue that, they at least showed the end of one of the greatest dangling plot throws of the Marvel animation show ever. And of course, we're going back to Spider-Man in 97, where in the season finale, he loses Mary Jane, and we never get the resolution to that. And here we see Peter Parker with Mary Jane in that final episode,
Yay!
which has led to a lot of speculation and a lot of things where there's a push with fans to get a Spider-Man 97 show
Oh, we'll
made
get it
as
now.
well. Yeah, I think we are too. But a great job with the cameos. I would have liked to have seen maybe a couple more, but I mean, with so many X-Men characters they introduced, I understand why. But I still think they did a great job of picking and choosing where they use cameos, guys. Derek, what do you think?
Yeah.
Real quick to piggyback though, is that the real Mary Jane? That's the
No
question.
more redheaded clones. We've had enough redheaded clones.
Well, it could be, right?
We'll just have clones of Peter Parker.
So there you go.
No clones. No more clones.
So your question is about my favorite cameo?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was definitely again it was when they were at the prison, and I loved how Thunderbolt Ross is like yeah, this is, here to, built to basically keep the Hulk from escaping, right? And then Rogue smashes in. She's like, yeah, but not from breaking in.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But obviously, I'm Team Cap all the way. So seeing him, obviously disappointed that they didn't get Chris Evans to voice him. But otherwise, it was
that would
great.
blow our whole budget.
Yeah, I know. It was great to actually have him, in this and actually serve a point. Right, like he was trying to do what at this point, because it's hard to tell of everything that happens in our timelines, because obviously the MCU is the MCU, but when we're talking about within the actual comic books of X-Men and Avengers, Civil War is still not going to happen for several more years in the comic books, right? Because it was 97 when not 97. Got that mixed up. Was that 99? Or was Civil War early 2000s? I have to look that up. But anyways,
yeah, be that as it may, this version of Captain America has not been through Civil War yet.
Yes. So, but anyways, it was good. So I'm gonna look that up while I'm doing it. Oh no, I guess it was later. It was 2006, 2007. Okay, so a little bit later than I thought. So about 10 years. So.
Yeah,
Scott?
I was on Threads. Sorry, Kyle. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask you who the cameos who stood out for you.
Oh, my favorite cameo, blink and you'll miss it, Omega Red.
Yeah, that was a good,
interesting. Seeing him there, because, in 1997, the Soviet Union has fallen, right? So we've got Russia, and we've got all those Soviet heroes that are now like Red Guardian and fill in the whole team here, Crimson Dynamo. And we're just like, well, what do we do now that there's no more, USSR? Talk about dealing with things like the Winter Soldier, right? What do we do now that there's just Russia and we are the capitalist pig dogs? So let's. So I think that'll be an interesting storyline if they want to tell it about what's up with Omega Red and all the other Russian mutants out there. But yeah, he was my favorite cameo. I was on Threads discussing the episode with Captain America of X-Men 97 where he and Rogue meet. And there were so many, let's just say, users younger than me who were talking about how they're disgusted with this version of Captain America. He's obviously the top cop and all cops are bastards. That kind of thing, right? And I'm just like, whoa, people. This is Steve Rogers. He's going to turn into Nomad. If there's anybody out there who understands when you need to rebel against a tyrannical government, it's him. You can drop all this top cop nonsense right now. This is Captain America. I'm not going to let you besmirch my boy like this. Yes, he's made some mistakes, but he is not Mr. Law and Order, and we always have to, good soldiers follow orders. He left that stuff behind in the ice whenever he got, thrown there after World War II. When he came out in the time period of the bicentennial of the United States, it was to try and remind people about real American ideals about freedom and individual responsibility, but then also being a part of a society that's bigger than you and understanding that sometimes you have to make sacrifices for the greater good. Right? And now, of course, like we just said, this is the Captain America that has not yet been through the Civil War. But still, even in this situation where he was talking to Rogue, she was just not out for justice. She was out for revenge. And Cap was trying to explain that to her. But he essentially did the thing thing you never do, especially with a redhead, and tell a woman to calm down. That was a bad move, Cap. That was a bad move. So she grabbed the shield and threw it because she knows that if you really want to hurt a guy like Captain America, you mess with his toys.
Yes.
And that's that makes him sad. As a fellow geek, that makes him sad. So yeah, it was a great portrayal of Captain America. That's right. That's right. Anyway, but yeah, so Captain America cameo, amazing, but my favorite cameo, Omega Red. I want to see him and Wolverine fight each other. Come on, let's do it.
Yeah. So, guys, Marvel is definitely capitalizing on this because not only did we have the X-Men 97 cartoon, Marvel is putting out a comic which is going to tell more stories within that X-Men 97 timeline as well. We'll see how this plays out. You know, sometimes they've tried this before. They've had X-Men for, I believe it was X-Men Forever, where they've tried to, like, if Chris Claremont wrote the story he wanted to tell if he had never left the X-Men book in the 90s, things like that. So we will see how this plays out. But I think it's fair to say that X-Men 97 has been a much needed hit for Marvel, period, whether you want to call it MCU, Marvel Animation, whatever. It's got people talking. And obviously with Deadpool Wolverine coming out later, people are talking about it. But before we close out this episode, I do want to talk about what we are looking ahead for. Probably not going to be till 2025 before we see season 2 of this show. But they left us with some pretty interesting cliffhangers. Obviously, Apocalypse looking to be a big part of next season. You have Magneto, where they're doing the Joseph storyline. Obviously, if you read the comics, spoiler alert, Joseph was actually ending up being a clone of Magneto. But in here, it's a little different. But what I'm truly excited about is we are getting the Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix storyline going to be told in season 2. It looks like where Scott Summers and Jean Grey went and inhabited the bodies of people in the future who actually were the people who raised Cable and raised young Nathan Summers. So I am so, and I love that. I love that miniseries as it happened. I am so excited they're doing that Askany storyline and doing that as well, guys. We talked earlier a little bit about Onslaught. I think that's season 3. I think, or maybe even if they get a season 4, they push it back because I think if Apocalypse is going to be a huge part of season 2, I think it could end with going into it, Age of Apocalypse season 3. That's just my opinion. But what do you guys have any predictions or what you hope to see for season 2, Derek?
Well, with the pacing of season 1, I would expect season 2 to actually be Age of Apocalypse, right? So I'm guessing that they'll have the first couple of episodes be dealing with a lot of this current situation, timeline, and all that stuff. And then somehow we'll get into the Age of Apocalypse. We'll get into the Four Horsemen. Obviously, we're going to get Gambit to come back. Who else is going to be, the Four Horsemen? So if you have Gambit, obviously we'll have to get, Archangel to reprise because he's the most iconic of the four. I would assume that we could definitely see Polaris come in. And then this is how we also get Psylocke to come in. But that would only be my guess. There could be somebody that besides Psylocke that actually plays this, but we'll get Old Man Wolverine, possibly. We'll obviously get him initially without his adamantium because we didn't really cover that because that's one of the most iconic scenes. They kind of brushed over it quickly, the way episode 9 and 10 kind of got into it because really people don't understand. Yes, the adamantium is cool and it makes them quote unquote indestructible. But, if you actually understand, depending on which one they go, if they do Savage Wolverine, then understanding that the adamantium had been holding back Logan all these years, and he'll become even more beast mode. So which version of Wolverine are we going to get? So I imagine that's probably what they're going to really focus on most of this season. Now, to your point, is it going to slow down a little bit, Kyle? And then is it going to lead into Age of Apocalypse? Possibly. But the way this pacing is, I imagine Apocalypse will be the more main focus of this, which will lead us to the Age of Apocalypse throughout at least the back half of season 2, which should mean we should get a cameo from, or at least at some point, a couple episodes with Colossus as well. And obviously we're going to get some peak Bishop and obviously more involved with Cable.
Yeah, I want some Blink if we get Age of Apocalypse as well. So
Ooh.
But Scott, what about you? Any predictions for season 2 or something you want to see?
I really want to see Age of Apocalypse. I feel like I saw in one of the opening montages for season 1 of X-Men '97, like little tiny clip of Wolverine with only one hand, that kind of stuff. I think there was a blink and you'll miss it reference to Age of Apocalypse.
Yeah,
And
there's
now that
one
we've
with
had,
Forge, Bishop, Wolverine, and Storm. I think are in that. There's like a couple
yeah,
snippets where it shows
yeah.
them, but
Now,
I didn't
so
catch if Wolverine only had one hand in that version.
I think he did because that's the hallmark of this is Age of Apocalypse because Logan's lost a hand and he's got the stump.
Mhm.
I think that we will, like Derek said, our pacing is such that we're 1990s aesthetic, but we're definitely not 1990s pace. So we'll get to like Apocalypse. We'll be doing stuff in the first 2 episodes, and then either time travel via Bishop because we saw Bishop getting ready to do more time travel, or just a time jump. We'll see the storyline picks up in Age of Apocalypse, and people have all been through a bunch more trauma and stuff. And whoever our character is that is experiencing it for the first time will have to find some way to get back to their proper timeline. So yeah, I think that will happen, and then I think that will lead us to season 3 will be Onslaught, and that will help Marvel Animation to launch a bunch of other shows because you could do Heroes Reborn and tell a bunch of other stories. Then I'll bring them all back together in like a big animated movie finale, in either like actual theatrical release animated movie finale or just on Disney Plus. And I'm trying to think if there are any other major X-Men storylines that I think might show up at that time in season 2.
I mean, you could get
And
Excalibur.
I think with Nightcrawler on the team, and you're probably not going to see. You might see like Captain Britain show up. I don't think you're necessarily going to see Excalibur. One of the storylines I don't think you'll see it for season 2, but I could see it as a season 3 storyline is the Flanix and the introduction of Generation Next.
oh wow, yeah, okay, yeah.
With
That's
Legion.
well, Legion's another part. The Legion quest is another possible storyline. I could see the whole Muir Island saga is always a possibility as well. There's a lot of ways they could go. I think if you're going to ask me what my hope is for season 2 is that they slow the pace down just a little bit. I think that would be beneficial, especially if they're going to be trying to tell storylines in 2 different timelines right now with Scott and Jean doing Ask Any Son and them back in Egypt with Apocalypse. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I'm really looking forward to it. And again, the depressing thing is we're probably, from everything I'm hearing, we're probably not seeing this new season until sometime in 2025.
I mean, the good thing is it's already written, though. That's the good thing by Bo, right, that we talked about. He wrote seasons 1 and 2. He's worked on both. They'll probably have some finishing touches, but I would imagine we'll probably get it, less than 12 months from where we are, probably springtime like we did next year, which is okay.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. But I know we didn't cover everything with X-Men '97. There's a lot. We could spend 3 hours here talking about X-Men '97. Yeah. I mean, but just real quick, a few things I just want to just mention real quick. Some of the best voice acting I've heard on an animated show in a good while. Just their dedication to telling a great story and keeping things, even though with their pacing and stuff like that, it kept the true spirit of the X-Men throughout this whole first season, and it just did a phenomenal job. And I think Marvel knows what they have with this. I would suspect that we're probably going to end up getting at least 4 to 5 seasons out of this before it's all said and done, because I think that the demand is there, the popularity is there, and I think that it's depending on how fast they burn through comic story arcs, they got a good ways to go. So
yeah.
I have a question for you, Mr. Kyle, then real quick, not to go too much longer, but with the demand for X-Men '97 in cartoon version, obviously we're going to get Wolverine and Deadpool this summer here pretty soon, which we're excited for. But do you think X-Men '97 cartoon is going to help prolong X-Men coming to live action, right? We've obviously gotten some sprinkles here and there, right, with mutants from what we've seen in the MCU and again what we're going to get this summer. But do you think that's going to prevent and prolong it because there's going to have this entertainment another avenue?
I don't think so, because I actually think it's going to help get live action X-Men done. I know it's been announced recently that a writer that he wrote the last Hunger Games movie, he has been hired on to start working on a script for a live action X-Men film. I think more than anything is the fact that I just don't believe we're going to see X-Men in the MCU until after whatever the plan is with the next Avengers arc, with which was in Secret Wars, because I think that is how they're going to properly introduce the X-Men into the MCU. I think that's where we're at. So my guess is going to be, depending on also what happens with Deadpool and Wolverine, I think we're looking at least 2028 before we'll see a live action X-Men film, because I think they want to get a little more separation, get a more. I think they know how important it is, and I think that Marvel and Bob Iger and Kevin Feige have learned a lot of lessons over the last couple of years, and also seeing what Bob Chapek, I think, who I kind of hold at least in part responsible for where Marvel sits right now, because I think he got so obsessed with getting content out that it wasn't necessarily the quality that Marvel was known for up until that point. They're slowing down the pace. Where they're talking 3 movies a year, 2 TV shows. Knowing what is still on the plate, we still have Fantastic Four out there. We have Captain America still coming. We've got a Thunderbolts show or a Thunderbolts movie coming. We've got another Spider-Man coming. Tom Holland has already talked
We
about
got Agatha coming out later.
Yeah, we have Agatha this year. We have Ironheart coming out. But the way they're setting it up now is these Marvel TV shows aren't going to be quite as necessary to watch as they made them before. They're kind of be kind of their own little standalone things. You don't need to have watched them to be kind of following what's going on. And I think that's the big thing for Marvel right now, is that they're in a position where I think they're realizing everything can't tie in together. They're going just to start telling the stories, and maybe they lead into certain groups lead to certain things, and they find a way to bring it all in, but not everything has to tie together so you understand something. They still have some decisions to make. We don't know what's going on as far as recasting for Kang. There's been several rumors out there. I'm all for Coleman Domingo getting the role. We know Giancarlo Esposito, who we love, of course, is Grant in The Mandalorian. He has got a secret role in the MCU, but we have been told he will be in the new Captain America film. So there's a lot of moving pieces still in the MCU. I think after Deadpool, we will at least maybe have a little better sense of direction. And let's not the biggest elephant in the room is what is Fantastic Four going to be. I think that's one of the biggest questions still floating out there, and what it's going to lead to. I have my speculation, but we'll see what happens with it. But it's an interesting time to be an MCU fan. I'm hoping we are back to a path where we're going to see some of the quality we were used to, but I don't think we'll ever quite see the same MCU that we got with the Infinity Saga, and I'm fine with that. I think it needs to evolve, and it needs to, quote unquote, morph into something of a different place. And I think this is what they're doing with the animation, what they're planning to do now that it's now Marvel Television again and separated from Marvel Studios, and what their plan and what the plan Iger has of quality over quantity, not just with Marvel, but with a lot of things Disney. But it's going to take a few years for that to play out. But my guess is we will see X-Men live action after Avengers Secret Wars, and at the clock pace we're running right now, that's probably, I'm going to say, sometime in 2028.
I can see that, and I'm happy with that pace. I think that's a good idea. Like you said, they were approaching peak superhero movie, and as comic book fans from the 1990s, you don't want to see the comic book glut and the market crash happen in the movie version that you did back then.
Can't afford it.
And also let's be honest, and we're going to talk about this on the Fandom Podcast Network here very soon. It's not a great time for movies, period. No. The box office is not a good place right now, so that's going to determine a lot as well. But guys, I want to thank you so much for coming on and joining in our danger room here. Of course, this is True Believers on the Fandom Podcast Network, which of course you can find all of our audio podcasts at fpnet.podbean.com. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, again, please give us a like, give us a subscribe, and share us out. You can find us, of course, on all your major podcast catchers, whether it's iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, iHeartRadio, all the major ones out there. Of course, visit our Facebook page. We have a Facebook group for True Believers, of course, the Fandom Podcast main page. And, of course, guys, you are going to get very busy with What a Piece of Junk, because right around the corner, what could be a big addition to the Star Wars franchise, because we're finally going to a time in Star Wars that nobody has been there before in live action. And
Yep.
I am truly excited for Acolyte. So real quick before we get out of here, tell people where they can find you, and tell us a little bit about what you guys are expecting with your Acolyte cover, Scott.
Oh yeah, so you guys can find me on Threads. What the heck is my username on Threads? I think I'm at Derek_Gray. But you can also find me on Facebook under my real name. Yes, I am at Derek_Gray on Threads. And you can find me doing a whole lot of stuff from the cockpit of the Drunken Gungan here on the FPN, as Garrick and I are co-hosts along with Nathan for the What a Piece of Junk podcast, which is where we talk about Star Wars, more Disney stuff. So we're in the same Mickey Mouse clubhouse. We're just on a different floor from all these Marvel types. But as far as the Acolyte goes, I am filled with anticipation. I am nervously biting my fingernails a bit because I want this to be done really well. Because as a big-time Star Wars fan of the old expanded universe, I love the time frames that we talk about when the Jedi and the Republic were a much bigger deal. And the Acolyte is set in that time frame. So this is much, much prior to the events of the Phantom Menace. Nobody named Skywalker is going to be involved in these stories, at least as far as we can tell. And so I am anxious and eager to see, how do we handle a universe story there for Star Wars that involves the light side and the dark side, the Jedi, possibly the Sith, but also a bunch of other factions out there, as we are expanding upon the idea of Force witches, right? And people like to think of that as a Clone Wars concept, and it kind of is, but really, we've had witches who use the Force since the 1980s, since before Derek was alive, I think, when we had the Ewok movies way back in the day
I was
as
part of that.
follow-ups to Star Wars.
I was 1 and
Okay,
2.
all right. Okay, yes. Well, clearly.
Okay, Derek, just a quick question for you on the Acolyte. Are we going to find out if Carrie Ann Moss was a better fighter in The Matrix, or is she a better Force user?
Well, is this actually just going to end in a season finale of her just putting down the goggles and she's actually in the Matrix? And this is just doing, because we know that Star Wars is referenced in the Matrix, so why wouldn't it be all part of the same
or she's just going to open her hands, and in one hand will be a red pill and the other hand will be a blue pill?
Maybe. Well, it'll be a lightsaber.
It's a red
blue lightsaber,
exactly,
and a red lightsaber.
No, red Kyber crystal, blue Kyber crystal. That's what.
So there we go. Well, Derek, where can people find you on social media?
So pretty much at this point, I'm just on the Facebook, Derek Marsh. You can find me under my real name. But as you mentioned, right, there's a lot of social media that we do for What a Piece of Junk. So please join What a Piece of Junk, a Star Wars podcast. Join our Facebook group. Obviously, we get all the great FPNet, media pushes when everyone comes out with new content. Same thing, you can find any of our content under the other banners, as we all like to do that. And yeah, it's going to be busy because we've had a finished up Bad Batch season 3 just a few weeks ago. We got that out not that too long ago. We had a nice little hiatus. This is actually, as we mentioned, the May 31st is technically the end of Star Wars month. Apparently May has now been dubbed Star Wars month. Since lots happened in prior years, as well as May the 4th and May the 5th and everything else that comes around with Star Wars. But yeah, we're super excited for the Acolyte. I'm with you guys. I'm hyped, especially since that trailer was released. I'm excited because it's pretty much no linkage to any of the current stuff that we've been accustomed to for the many years, other than basically Yoda is probably the only link character that we might see some cameos at some point, whether it'll be puppets or CGI, we don't know yet. But yeah, I'm super excited because I actually just started diving into The Light of the Jedi on Audible, which was really the first novel that they released a few years ago when they started doing this High Republic era. So I'm about midway through right now on that and liking it so far. It's an interesting take. But this is obviously towards the tail end of that era, as we're getting closer and closer to the Sith making a final push to the Phantom Menace that we just alluded to, which just celebrated 25 years. So we also talked about that recently this month. So, but anyways, good stuff over there on the What a Piece of Junk Star Wars podcast Facebook group.
And I actually have a quick challenge for you, What a Piece of Junk guys, when the Acolyte is over. There was a phenomenal documentary put out about the Star Wars Christmas special that has things in it nobody ever knew. I'm challenging you guys. I think it's on Tubi now. I think you can find it on Tubi. Go watch it. I want a little Grunkin' Gungan reaction to one of the craziest times in Star Wars history.
If you want me to do commentary and criticism of the Star Wars Holiday Special, it will definitely involve something being drunken.
Yeah, I believe it. But the documentary is quite entertaining. And Scott, I think you will get a kick out of it. But you know what?
Yeah, I'll have to check it out.
I've gotten a kick out of talking with you guys about all things mutants and X-Men 97. It has been a pleasure. Until next time, because we got some stuff planned here for True Believers. We are back. Deadpool month is coming. I'm just
got
saying.
my tickets already.
I'm going to be calling upon you guys because we're going to be talking some pool, whether we're talking the original film, the Deadpool in the comics, Deadpool 2, and of course we will be covering Deadpool and Wolverine and all the ramifications of that here on True Believers on the Fandom Podcast Network. But until next time, you can find me, Kyle, at AKyleW on Twitter, on Discord. You can find me under Instagram and Threads at AKyleFandom. And, of course, you can also find me all over Facebook, anything to do with the Fandom Podcast Network. Thank you guys so much for listening and watching on our YouTube channel. Until next time, Excelsior, True Believers.